Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. So thank you all for joining us today for Grenzbach, Gleer & Associates webinar titled Hidden Treasures, an Analytics-Driven Culture at the Huntington Library, Art Collections, and Botanical Gardens. My name is Anthony Hale. I'm an Interactive Marketing Specialist here at Grenzbach, Gleer & Associates, and I'm also with Catherine Julitz. We are the hosts for this webinar. Before I turn it over to our presenters, please note that we'll be stopping the webinar at key points to answer any questions you might have. So to submit a question, just hover your mouse over the green bar until you see a question mark or a conversation bubble. And be sure to send the question to the host, which is Catherine, and any questions that we aren't able to get to during the session will be answered as part of the follow-up transcript that we'll email out to registrants. Following the webinar, we'll send out a link to a recording of today's session, PowerPoint slides, and written responses to all questions we don't get to during the session. If at any point during the webinar you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please email Catherine at cjulitz@grenzgleer.com or call our meeting provider WebEx directly at 866-229-3239. That's 866-229-3239. So now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Today we have with us Chris Lutz, Associate Director of Major Gifts at the Huntington Library, Art Collections, and Botanical Gardens. And sitting next to me is Dan Lohman, Senior Vice President of Philanthropic Analytics at GG&A. So with that, I'll turn it over to them.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm delighted to have Chris with us, and I've known Chris for a number of years, and I'm really happy that she agreed to do this presentation, because the Huntington, I think, has really done an exemplary job of taking a lot of information in a fairly complex fundraising environment and really shifting a culture from a very traditional kind of organization in terms of how it managed its fundraising to being more data-driven in its decision-making process. Chris has a lot of good examples to share today, and I'm just thrilled that she's here. Chris, are you all set for us to dive in?
I am, and we're delighted to be asked to share our experiences. We're really enthusiastic users of everything that GG&A has provided.
Thank you. To set the stage, especially given that there's some diversity in the audience, there's some higher education, some other cultural organizations from all over the country, maybe you could just take a minute to give us a little background about the Huntington, its unique set of collections, and then some of the more administrative sorts of things. How are you organized, your budget, the size of your membership, and so forth?
Okay, and please let me know if I'm going too long. The Huntington is an independent collections-based research and educational institution, and as Dan pointed out, we have glorious, extraordinary collections ranging from library collections comprised of 9 million manuscripts and rare books, including works from Shakespeare and Audubon and Darwin and Galileo, to distinguished American and European art collections, which include Renaissance bronzes, to post-war American art, and our magnificent botanical gardens, which are about a dozen themed gardens, ranging from the Japanese garden, which just celebrated its centennial earlier this spring, to one of our most recent gardens, which is a classical Chinese scholar garden. All that to say that our mission really is not just preserving the collections, but really building them, conserving them, providing access to them for a wide community of scholars, educators, visitors, members, internationally and locally. And we were established in 1919, so we have a volunteer structure of 5 trustees, a board of overseers comprised of about 60 individuals, most of them local, but we're trying to sort of expand that. We have a president, Steve Koblick, who's a charismatic and brilliant leader, and he oversees a senior staff of about 12. We have a vice president for advancement, Randy Schulman, oversees approximately 30 in our advancement offices, but that also includes membership and operations. And in terms of fundraising and in our advancement office, we're relatively small, certainly compared to some of the universities and local institutions here in Southern California. We have 7 line fundraisers, so that means 7 prospect managers, and that includes Randy, includes our vice president, our AVP, a major gifts director, myself, and I'm AD Major Gifts. We have a Society of Fellows director and a manager, a Foundation Corporate Relations director, and a Planned Giving director, and the position is currently open because our fabulous Planned Giving director, Kimberly Valentine, was wooed away to another local institution. And despite the richness of the Huntington's collections, we operate on relatively lean resources, and we sort of like to say that we have a culture of frugality before having a culture of frugality was cool, and it has served us really, really well. We have a budget, we raise a budget of about $40 million a year, and our endowment is currently just under $400 million.
And tell us about the campaign that you recently went through, and I think that really sets the stage for your decision to really change your use of data.
Certainly. So for generations to come, the Campaign for the Huntington was the largest fundraising effort in the institution's history. We began July 1st, 2004. The campaign ended June 30th. And it was ambitious for us. It was comprehensive, $175 million in annual capital and endowment funds. The overarching goal, beyond reaching those fundraising goals to serve our programs, was really broadening the donor base. And my position was the brainchild of our previous vice president, George Abdo, who really came to the Huntington with the mandate, as did our president, Steve Kodlik, of broadening the donor base, because we have a fantastic, loyal, traditional donor base that we're telling our president and vice president at the time, you know, we love the Huntington, but you all need to broaden and expand the pool so it's not just the same families sustaining this terrific institution. So again, the overarching goal was to broaden the base, while of course still stewarding and taking care of the people that have been supporting the institution. So we reached our goals, thankfully, each of our goals, and exceeded them, and actually reached the campaign goal of $175 million on August 2008. So really fortunate in terms of timing. And around that time, we had already been using some data to get age information for our members so we can determine who we were going to send out planned giving mailings to. And as part of the contract with Grenzebach Lear & Associates, since you all were our campaign consultants, part of the contract included a batch screening. I think it was about 1,000 names. So we started in 2005 by batch screening 1,000 names, and increasingly raised it. Again, our culture of frugality was such that I think we just only paid for the least amount that we could. However, we kept finding that it was very, very helpful in terms of uncovering people that had been maybe sustaining members for 15 years, but my goodness, look at all of the philanthropic capacity there is. And so because we ended up actually using the data, when the time came, I think it was Brian Chapman and then it was also John Gleer who had a conversation with our Vice President, George Abdo, talking about predictive modeling. We really, again, our culture of frugality, we really had to figure out, is this an investment that the Huntington wants to make? Is this something we want to spend money on? And if we get this massive amount of data, are we really going to use it? So we had several meetings with our membership and operations director, our major gifts director, our vice president, also our database guru, and certainly thought long and hard, and we decided to make the investment for predictive modeling. And I think I was maybe a little overly enthusiastic when I told our vice president that if he didn't see a return on investment, he could take it out of my salary. I wouldn't advise anybody to do that. Yeah, that was a little bit of hyperbole on my part. But I knew, I mean, given that was, I knew it was, our credibility and and also if and also I'm a bit of a data geek, as are my colleagues. So and we had really good experiences with Brian, your predecessor, Dan, and you've been fantastic as well. Your whole team has. So again, we made the investment, and that really took things to a new level, because it wasn't just about finding out who has capacity, but it was really using a blend of internal data that we have here at the Huntington in our Razor's Edge database, and external data, including the PRISM segmentation, including inclination for annual, major, and plan giving. And that really has just helped us not only discover people that have potential, but really prioritize who we're going to target and reach out to.
There's a couple of directions that I'd like to take this conversation, and the first piece, which you started to talk about, is what were the problems that you were trying to solve? What were the factors that led you to say, we've got this big pool of people and there's a lot of things we don't know how to start to address some of those different segments across major gifts and annual giving and planned gifts? And then the second piece, which we'll get into, which I think is really the most fascinating part of your experience, was how you made that tactical and started to use the data and use it in real world circumstances. But tell us a little bit about those issues that you were facing that drove you to the point where making that investment made sense.
Sure. Well, we and we sort of added to the challenges, but in a really good way. The challenge was that we really had already just overwhelming number of prospects, and it's a terrific problem, and we're very, very fortunate to have, quote unquote, that problem or challenge of an embarrassment of riches of prospects. So we wanted to really be smart, and we continue to improve. But you know, around that time when we decided to invest in the predictive modeling, we wanted to say, you know, we can do the obvious. Okay, let's see who has capacity, and just hand it to our one research analyst, and really, and as the point person of our data-driven efforts, it was really up to me, and it continued to be up to me to figure out, okay, what makes sense? Let's be judicious. We can't just hand 1,000 names to our one lone research analyst who's already overwhelmed with a lot of other requests and say, here, you know, validate them all. So it's up to me to figure out, okay, let's be judicious. Who's worth her time, her research time, and who's worth bringing to the table in terms of assigning to a prospect manager. We really wanted to prioritize. And given that, you know, we were in our fundraising for the Chinese Garden, for education, for library, we had all these different initiatives and continue to have all these projects. It just felt, you know, that we needed to sort of grow and take it to the next level in terms of not just finding out about capacity. And as somebody who has a little bit of a statistics background, I was incredibly enthusiastic just to see the results. What sold us was seeing, I think you all shared with the Huntington some redacted data results from some other institution, and just showed us the columns, the kind of information we could get, and seeing all of that was really exciting.
As you know, we start to think about how you use the data, one of, at least my sense of the Huntington historically, has been that there was a very closely connected but relatively small group of major donors and volunteers that were the vast majority of fundraising dollars. Yet at the same time, there's this fairly significant membership-based, a broader annual giving program. Was that viewed as a benefit to be capitalized on, as a problem where the base needed to be broadened? What was the general sense within the Huntington post-campaign about expanding the pool as a need or as a desire?
Oh, absolutely. It's a wonderful opportunity, I guess, that, as I said, you know, it was a real key overarching strategic objective of the campaign to broaden the base, and we're still doing that. And we see our membership base as that's the next generation of annual, major, and planned giving donors. And actually has always been that way, and yet we still do have a relatively traditional core loyal base. We are broadening it with people that have been supporting the Huntington perhaps for a long time or fairly recent, but just at different levels. And, you know, there's the old Rolodex fatigue. We also, our president, our board of overseers and our trustees made a real deliberate choice and during the campaign and letting people know this is going to be a mostly staff-driven campaign. Before that, the Huntington's fundraising efforts had been peer-to-peer, and that was before we had anybody on research. And our board members, I've heard them share stories in meetings about asking their colleagues for money, and they didn't realize they could have asked for much, much more, but we just weren't that sophisticated at the time. So the campaign really brought a new level of sophistication, a new level of strategy and thought, and post-campaign, we've wanted to sustain that momentum, and we have so many new strategic initiatives and projects to fundraise for, and with about 35,000 households that are members there. Again, there is a lot of potential there, but we really are relatively leanly staffed. My position, I've been with the Huntington about 7.5 years now, and that was the last new fundraising position. So while wanting to broaden the donor base, we need to be really working very smart and really efficiently in terms of how we're going to deploy fundraising resources.
So I want to dive straight into the weeds, Chris, and talk about what's up on the screen now. So after we'd taken a close look at the data that was in your own database, this external information was added, a pile of data comes back and lands on your desk at the Huntington. Let's first talk about how you organized it, which I think is probably what's reflected in the table that's up on the screen, the sample report, and then again we'll start to talk about the actionable pieces that followed that.
Okay, so we had, you all screened for us 145,000 household records in Razor's Edge, and that included active members, people that were lapsed members, people that had been scholars or are scholars, docents, volunteers. And I guess now, before I get into the weeds, if I could just ask for sort of an agreement from everybody on this call that kind of taking the vaguest approach of what we share here, what's shared at the webinar stays at the webinar, or at least just stays with your respective advancement colleagues, because we wouldn't want any of our lovely, lovely members or scholars or readers or docents necessarily to know how the sausage is made, because we really do appreciate their support. Okay, so having said that, we imported key pieces from GG&A. We imported annual, major, and planned giving ratings. You see that we imported the PRISM cluster code. We imported philanthropic capacity rating, which is goes from P1 to P6. And when I say we imported that, we know that we were able to access DonorScape through the life of the contract with Grenzenbach, Lear & Associates. And this is where this just has worked for us, is importing it into Razor's Edge so that we can see it in the context of our information. And on a dynamic basis, I have a colleague, Peter Johnson, to thank, because he's been phenomenally patient and wonderful in terms of the number of reports that we ask of him. And he actually is a partner in saying, you know, Chris, you might, maybe if we slice it and dice it this way, or this might be a new report that you would want to have. So he has created in our Razor's Edge database a multitude of queries, of custom reports that I'm now able to just pull myself, so that I don't need to be bothering him at every moment when I get some idea. And one of the custom reports that we have is seeing prospect managers are able to see their portfolio in the context of what we here at the Huntington call our GGA rating report. And that's just the standard report where we have the prospect's name, you see the gift capacity. I think just in terms of columns, we didn't have space to show, but we do have our own prospect management system. So that's what the prospect manager decides how much can this individual give to the Huntington and what's their inclination level. So we have that. Then we have the GGA rating information. Then we have the PRISM cluster code. And at what level are they currently giving? And this is pretty fantastic because we're able to see, for example, Thomas Gainsborough, and we obviously changed the names to respect our donors' privacy, but Thomas Gainsborough, we see that he has a gift capacity of 1 to 10 million. And all across the board, he's a 1, 1A, P, and P1. So he has the top annual major upon giving ratings. His PRISM cluster code is Money and Brains. And right now, Thomas Gainsborough, is giving at the fellows level. And that means he's giving at $2,500 to $4,999 a year. However, he's given $4.6 million. So he is likely, if I'm recalling correctly, upon giving donor, and he's at the fellows level, and that's fine, and we'll let him stay that way. But this really has helped on a day-to-day basis, on a monthly basis, really help each of us just prioritize who we're going to reach out to.
You raised an interesting point that I think is probably worth talking about for just a second. And the point was that you were able to work with your database staff to develop some set reports. So, and I want to emphasize your role as the Associate Director of Major Gifts is not an inherently technical or research-oriented role. And I'd like if you could talk for just a minute about how you were able to actually achieve that, how you designed those reports, how you decided what went into them, so that you were able to combine the role of your lone researcher with the available data in the system and ultimately tie it to your work, which was prospect identification and cultivation.
Absolutely, and my role has evolved to, when it was first created, this position did not have a portfolio and was not a prospect manager, and was always the point person for our data-driven efforts. However, in terms of who actually pulls information and creates this, it's a really, as you said, a close partnership with our database staff. And so, as it's evolved, because our donor base and prospect pipeline has grown so much, and just as needs and opportunities have arisen, I now do carry a portfolio, and I can tell you when that shift changed, I had a new appreciation for why my colleagues weren't always very enthusiastic when I would bring new names to the table. I have a really terrific collegial, familial, mutually respectful team here. It's pretty fantastic. People have long tenures. However, I got it. I understood, oh, yeah, you're all overburdened, and now I'm one of you, and I now have too many people in my portfolio that I can't get to. So, I mean, I guess knowing that we really needed to use the data, one, it's just exciting to see, and believe me, I'm not excited at the idea of making cold calls, so that wasn't exciting necessarily, but seeing that, oh my goodness, there's this person who's been this level of member for, 25 years, and they have a gift capacity of $250,000. We know full well it doesn't mean that they can or should give it to the Huntington, but wow, let's see if we can find out about them. Let's see if we can develop individualized relationships. And just in the course of using the information, we learned by trial and error, and certainly bringing reports to the table. We had a lot of different input from colleagues of what might be helpful and what might not. So we just refined as we went along. I hope that addressed your question, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that you and I had talked about before was about how the internet doesn't raise any money, that ultimately you have to get out and see people and tie these back to portfolios. That's actually probably a good segue into the previously promised good stuff. As I said in the introduction, in my view, Huntington has done a particularly good job of applying this kind of strategic and almost theoretical data analysis to very practical very specific initiatives that were designed to do specific things like upgrade membership or identify planned giving prospects, and even the example I'm going to ask you to talk about now of just using up old pieces of paper that you had lying around your office and converting that into revenue.
Yes. And I want to say that we did not mail some 15th century gorgeous atlas to our folks. So just the using up old paper refers brilliantly to, towards the end of the campaign, we had a stack of maybe about 1,000 case statements. They were beautiful pieces that our communications office created early on in the campaign so that our prospect managers could go out and meet with their donors on a one-to-one basis. So these were pieces that we would share when we were on visits or when we were going to have a proposal. We had been so judicious about not using them all in the beginning that we then realized, wow, it's getting close to the end of the campaign, and we still have these, and we could not, in good conscience, just recycle them. So, and yet we also had already used them with everybody that we felt we needed to. So what we did was, okay, the charge was, well, Chris, you're always talking about this data. How about figure out who would be ideal to mail to? So we did some slicing and dicing, and we looked at gift capacity and other, if they were active members, if they were I think it was if they were local, looking at their giving history, and we came up with this group, and we developed sent a nice form cover letter, told them that, we were grateful for their support of the campaign, and we sent this off. And the story that, the neat anecdote to share, and I will confirm this with this couple very soon, but about a month later, and I think we ended up getting a few gifts. We also included an envelope and invited them to be a part of the campaign. So we received back a few gifts. But the story to share is that about a month later, we ended up getting a phone call from somebody that we were told was interested in making a gift. And I got the assignment of calling this person back because it was a member, and in my head, we were thinking maybe $50. So I called this gentleman back, and he's asking questions and really specific finance questions and wants to know about our endowment payout rate. And towards the end of the call says, okay, well, I am thinking of making a gift. And ultimately, my wife and I are thinking of including the Huntington in our estate plans, and it won't be a lot. It's just going to be maybe about $10 to $20 million. And of course, I almost fell out of my chair. And having a fantastic plan giving director as our colleague, I said, okay, you really need to talk to Kimberly. That's fantastic. Let me transfer the phone, and she'll help you. And he very, very firmly, he's an attorney, so he very firmly said, no, I don't want to talk to anybody else. I want to know what I'm investing in, and I want you, and you'll just do just fine. He said, answer these questions, this, and this. I think he had about 5. And he said, and talk to your CFO, and I want to know these. And before I invest in anything, I don't want to fall in love with anything before I know the numbers. And so, it took. Hung up the phone, ran into my colleague's office, who's a plan giving director, and we figured out, yes, send him this information, but yes, let's invite him to a behind-the-scenes tour of this fabulous lithography exhibition that we have, because he had mentioned that he and his wife collect fruit labels, and yes, we had a meeting with CFO, and it took some time, but they finalized their estate plans. We're the primary beneficiary of their estate. They've now joined the Arabella and Henry Huntington Heritage Society. They have since purchased some library manuscripts for us, and they're fantastic, low-key people that really, up until the phone call, had been members at, I believe, with a senior discount for $90 since 1992. So.
That's such a good story.
Yeah.
Well, I like it because it's the whole arc that it started with a good approach to looking at the list within the database where this was just a name and an ID number to a creative use of collateral materials that you had on hand to a really effective cultivation process where it was ultimately their personal interaction with you and the Huntington that led them to this high level. That, you know, the anecdotes are important because the biggest gifts are almost always anecdotes. But let's go a little bit farther down the scale and talk about the ways that the Huntington used data to make decisions about the membership.
Sure. In terms of, and you alluded to it, we've used data to send upgrade appeals, to reach out to lapsed members. And I should, you know, at the risk of being overly cliche, I'd like to just share two statistics that I think capture the Huntington's thought about data and statistics. The first is by George Bernard Shaw, and it is a mark of a truly intelligent person to be moved by statistics. So that's the one spectrum. The other is by a local hero here in Southern California, Vin Scully, who's the voice of the Dodgers, who says statistics are used much like a drunk uses a lamppost, for support, not illumination. So somewhere in between lies the Huntington. In terms of capitalizing on membership, we really are grateful for all of our member support. And in terms of you know, what's going to be more effective and more get a better response. An AD major gift director picking up the phone and just trying to have a visit with somebody because they have a fantastic gift capacity, and they often can be scared by my title. Or one tactic that and this is just part of our multifaceted strategy, is really having prospect and screening events. And Dan, and I think that might be the next slide, talking about specialized events. But what we've done is we have one coming up next Tuesday, and we currently have a Civil War exhibition. It's a fantastic exhibit. It's all from the Huntington's collections, and everything we do in terms of using the data is trying to engage our members and engage our potential prospects and really connect them with the collection. So we're inviting them for coffee and pastries and a behind-the-scenes tour with our curator. And that's fairly straightforward enough just to be able to initiate conversations. How we developed that invitation list, though, was another matrix of slicing and dicing GG&A information, and we targeted people that are active members that mostly have a primary plan giving rating, and the primary plan giving rating takes into account demographic information, historic giving information, and their age. And we did it, we're doing it on a Tuesday in the morning because when we've had other events, other prospect events that are on weeknights, I've had conversations with older women, older men that say, we'd love to come, and we love the Huntington, and we want to get that up close and personal look, but we don't drive at night. And if you had something in the daytime, we would come to that. And I should say that, of course, as members, our members are invited to a multitude of things throughout the year, and we certainly try to connect and broaden our donor base the old-fashioned way by just meeting our members and being there. But this is one of the proactive screening and prospect events that we have.
I love the use of Tuesday at 10 a.m. because, I mean, this is classic segmentation of using age data, capacity data for the first pass, and then you certainly limit your audience when you do something at Tuesday at 10 a.m. to people who are available Tuesdays at 10 a.m. And I think that was just a really clever way to get a target audience in a very positive environment. It's great. We have a question, which was, what was the rating of the $10 to $20 million estate donors that we talked about a few slides back?
It's actually fluctuated, interestingly enough, and Dan, I meant to share that with you, but back then it was 100,000. 100,000 to 249,000.
And has it's gone up since then?
It has gone down, but we know that it might be based on, some something on their part, perhaps. I mean, they are very much still have capacity. And one might say the obvious thing is, oh my gosh, it's the Huntington. Why wouldn't they have exhausted and gone down the list of all 100,000? We are very, very fortunate, and because of the GGA's information, we now know that the Huntington just attracts some fantastic people, and our donor base and our membership base tends to be wealthier, more affluent, higher educated than perhaps some other nonprofits. And I think that's probably the same for most arts and culture institutions throughout the country. But we had a lot of people that were at that rating where they were at, and we just hadn't gotten a chance to get to them yet.
And I think it also reinforces a GG&A truism that we tend to rate low. The idea is to create a floor and not a ceiling, and then identify pools that you can then work from, doing exactly the kinds of things that you've done at the Huntington to fill in the blanks with information that is hard to get externally.
Right, and we love that. It's served us. It's served you all really well in terms internally. I'll share that my colleagues like that it's a conservative. I think it gives it more credibility when I'm able to share. I'd much rather hear people say, oh, wow, well, we know that they can give more. Well, good, because the data is only a guidepost. It's a fantastic compass. It's a fantastic guidepost, but it's still only that. It's still the old-fashioned, yes, of course, it's not going to trump what a prospect manager would know.
So we've got a couple other quick topics left. I want to invite anyone listening that if you've got questions for Chris or for us at GG&A, now is a great time to start submitting them through the conversation bubble, as we'll have time to answer some questions at the end of this.
And Dan, can I maybe share in terms of going back to the screening and prospect events, one of the things, so you know, we've talked a little bit about the one next Tuesday, and we've had a few others that have happened in the daytime. The direct ask events where it's please come and hear about the history of anatomy of the Huntington, or hear about Mr. Huntington, his cash and his collecting, and learn about the Society of Fellows. That's, I guess we think of it akin to an invitation for a timeshare pitch. People know that we're going to be inviting them to consider increasing their support. And those have been pretty fantastic as well, because people are able to self-select. They're able to, if they want to just come to hear about the library and have no interest in learning about the Society of Fellows, they're able to do that, and we thank them for attending. But if they have been curious and have read about the Fellows in the calendar, or have heard their friends talk about it, but still aren't really familiar with what is this group, it gives them an opportunity, just an excuse, a nudge to reach out to us. And I've shared with you one conversation with one of the couples that came to one of our most recent Society Fellows prospect events. As we were talking, we're having wine and hors d'oeuvres just before going into the Amundsen reading room and getting a sneak preview of library treasures. The couple tells us that they're complimenting the Huntington and how great we are to do these kinds of events, where we obviously are targeting people that have been supporting us at this certain level for a number of years, and wow, you're just so smart that you're targeting us, because we've been giving you at the same level for all of these years, and it's just, we've been really thinking recently of increasing our support, and you just got us just at the right time. So it's been pretty terrific in that way. And I do want to share, though, for those people that are listening, it doesn't mean, we send out many invitations. We may only get 20 households that respond. Out of those, we'll have, maybe 2 or 3 no-shows, and out of maybe, 15 people in the room, we are ecstatic if we get 1 or 2. It's about what the underlying message, too, is that everybody that leaves these events leaves so enthusiastic and happy members. And our membership and operations director is happy, because it helps her in terms of the next time she's going to send out an appeal, perhaps. But it also, we also get people that are docents that volunteer their time, and in addition to being volunteers, they're also members. And it really helps across the board for annual, major, and planned giving potential. And as many fellows as we've gotten from our targeted ask events, we have gotten fantastic planned giving conversations out of it. We've had people that say, oh no, I really can't increase my membership level. I don't feel like I could afford it. I can't afford $2,500 a year, but we don't have children, and I have been thinking of making the Huntington a beneficiary of my life insurance plan. Or I have this beautiful piece of American art that I'd like to have a conversation with one of your curators to see if you're interested.
What's next on your agenda at the Huntington? It's post-campaign. You have a number of these initiatives in place. You're growing. You've been in the news with some very positive things over the last couple of years. What are some of your next approaches to not just the data, but in general, of how do you plan to tackle the next few years of fundraising?
Oh my goodness, we are so feeling leanly staffed these days, and I'm probably saying that because we've been without a planned giving director for 3 months. But we have a lot going on. We have an education and visitor center that we hope to be we are fundraising for. We hope happens, and that could be, $60 to $65 million project. We are hoping to renovate the desert garden, and that could also be a huge, nice, big project. We still have phase 2 of the Chinese garden, which our Associate Vice President, Susie Moser, she's really in charge of fundraising for that. So, education, fundraising, we're without a director of education right now. She's going back, the person who had been our director of education had been here for about a decade and is going back to school to pursue a PhD in education. So we just have still our annual operating budget. Annual giving is absolutely crucial at the Huntington, as it is anywhere else, I'm sure, and a lot of planned giving potential, and certainly major gifts. We have a mausoleum that we want to renovate and continue to renovate. We just are renovating the library exhibition hall. There are numerous things to fundraise for that we just need to continue to be smart and effective and efficient. And we continue to have an embarrassment of riches. During the campaign, we met every single Friday was our campaign meeting, and it was my responsibility to bring names to the table and add to the pipeline. We've, over the year, in the last year and a half, we've recalibrated our efforts to prioritize and focus, and sort of given ourselves permission to not just add names to our portfolios, but really use the GGNA information to re-rate, to withdraw, to reassign, to rethink things, and continuing to have focused strategy sessions on how we're going to reach out to them as individuals, but also having strategy sessions on what are we going to come up with so that we can reach batches of people. So it's a multifaceted approach.
Given that many of the people on today's call are also at cultural institutions, which are unique in many ways, but in particular, they have this physical site like the Huntington that people like to come to. There's a reason to go there on a regular basis, which is perhaps not the same for a university where you may have to travel. You kind of need a good reason to go back, or certainly a hospital where you try to avoid going back as much as possible. But how much of your cultivation work on the major gift side happens at the Huntington versus you leaving the grounds and going out and seeing people on their turf?
A vast majority, and I think you're absolutely right. It is because people like coming here, and because this is where the stuff is. It doesn't mean we don't go out. Our AVP, Susie Moser, as I said, who's in charge of the Chinese garden, she and our president traveled to China a few months ago, and certainly we have donor visits that are more local, Orange County or the desert or Santa Barbara or New York, but really because we have a dozen magnificent themed gardens because we have the library collections, and we can take donors or prospects down into the basement so they can see where we keep the maps, or where we can keep a history of medicine collection, for example, or they can see some pieces of American art and have a conversation with the curator. The majority is here on campus, here on site.
Great. So I've got one last question for you, but again, I want to remind everybody that if you have questions for Chris or us, now's your chance. So if you submit them, we will certainly have a chance to get to them. But Chris, again, going from sort of big and exciting stuff about showing your great collection to potential major donors right back into the weeds, how well, first, I guess the question is, did you need to, and if so, how did you overcome the issue that any rating process, internal or external, is inherently flawed? It just never knows as much about what a donor wants to do as you talking to a donor. How did you overcome the false positives or the false negatives?
I think by sheer volume. I mean, we could, and we did have conversations of, well, what if we know that this is, that the GGA rating is too conservative? Should we go back and update it? And really, when you have, when you're sort of feeling overwhelmed and everybody has so many prospects and so many visits and so many projects, so many deadlines, meetings, letters to write, conversations to have, we need to, and we have just focused our efforts on what's going to maximize results. So yes, there have been conversations, and there still are sometimes of, well, this isn't perfect. This is overvalued, undervalued. No, I think we might have one of our colleagues is married, and I think on the GGA rating, it showed her as head of household, not him. I mean, we just don't really worry about that. That in the grand scheme of things, we use the information as best we can, and we just have in our head, as I keep saying over and over, the caveat of, it's not the end-all be-all. We love the GGA information, but we know it's never going to replace. It's always never going to replace the human interaction, the cultivation that needs to happen, and ultimately it's prospect managers that decide. We take your information with a bit of a grain of salt, and we certainly do use it, but ultimately the prospect manager decides what the rating is, what the internal rating here for the Huntington is. They're the ones that prioritize. Nobody is looking over our shoulders and saying, no, you really should rate this person this way. And I guess I don't know if that's just because I have a feel. My first instinct is to say it's just because of the sheer volume. We just don't have the time to get hung up on overcoming the flaws. We just use what we can and go. And sorry if that's not as sophisticated, or perhaps maybe, I don't know if that's the best practices thing to do, but that's what has worked here.
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever works in your own environment is ultimately the best practice, right? Well, Chris, I'm no Terry Gross, but I certainly appreciate you fielding my questions. And I think the information that you offered today about your experience at the Huntington, certainly helpful for me to understand from a practical application standpoint, and I hope that was the case for our listeners. I want to remind everyone you can still ask questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Anthony with a couple of closing remarks. But Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, and I'll just pretend that you're Terry Gross. You're pretty fantastic, too. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, so if there aren't any more questions, following this session, we will send out a transcript of all additional questions and a copy of today's presentation, and a link to the recording of the webinar. And so thank you all very much for attending, and thank you to Dan and Chris as well for a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.